In the second part of Unit 13, we're going to have a look at the urinary system. So these are the organs and the structures that are involved in helping us eliminate waste and to form our urine. The urinary system, of course, is a part of the body where it's part of several systems that will help us eliminate waste. As we go through our regular metabolism, as we eat and we drink, we're going to generate waste that our body doesn't need or can't use, and we need to get rid of that waste. So here's a look at some of the systems that are involved in that. We've got the digestive system. This gets rid of water, salts, bile, a lot of digestive products, stuff that we just cannot process. In the digestive system, of course, our liver is going to break down toxins. It's also going to get rid of any red blood cell waste. If you think about how many red blood cells we use and we use up, there's going to be a lot of that. Our respiratory system will help us get rid of excess carbon dioxide, and also we lose water as a part of that. The integumentary system, this is going to help us get rid of water, also get rid of salts and small amounts of nitrogenous waste. In our sweat, we do secrete some of those nitrogenous waste, which contributes to some of the smell of sweat. And then finally, our urinary system. Now this is going to be our system that's going to eliminate the largest portion of water, of course. But we also get rid of most of our nitrogenous waste here, as well as some salts. So here's a quick look at our urinary system and what makes up our urinary system. So the main part of our urinary system, of course, are going to be the kidneys. Okay, and when you look at the kidneys, have a look at the really large blood supply that comes in from the aorta, and then of course the return feeds directly into the inferior vena cava, heading back to the heart. So the kidneys, and they have a huge blood supply. Their function is to extract waste from the blood, so hence the big blood supply. From the kidneys, we have two ureters. And that's going to be those yellow tubes that you see in the background here. I'm trying to highlight them in green. Hopefully that shows up. So those are two tubes, and they're going to transfer the urine that's produced in the kidneys and bring them down to the urinary bladder, which is our next structure right here. I've highlighted it in orange. And the bladder is going to serve as a reservoir. It's going to hold our urine until the time that we need to evacuate the bladder and to get rid of it. And then the final structure we have down here is going to be the urethra, and this is a tube that transfers urine from the bladder to the outside world. And in this case, it's going to be, we've got a male here, and in the case of the male, the urethra shares a common opening with the reproductive system, and it empties through the penis. This isn't the case in the female, and we'll talk about that in a second. So let's have a look at these bit by bit. We'll come back and talk about the kidneys at the end because they're going to be involved with the major part of the physiology. So let's talk about the anatomy. So of course, everything will start with the kidneys. Once the urine is formed, the next step are going to be passing through the ureter. So the ureter is a long, slender, muscular tube. If we were to cut it open, look at a cross-section of it, we'd see that it has epithelial cells lining the inside of the lumen. There's muscle layers along the outside, and those are going to be involuntary, so smooth muscles. We don't have any control of that. The urine is pushed down into the bladder through these contraction of the muscles, and it's got some fibrous connective tissue on the outside to kind of hold the ureters in place. The ureters are entirely extraperitoneal, which means they exist outside the peritoneal cavity, so they're not part of that body cavity. They're on the outside of the peritoneal membrane, so they're separate from most of the other digestive organs. They extend from the kidney all the way down to the urinary bladder, and between muscular contraction, the peristalsis, very similar type of contraction we talked about in the digestive system, and by gravity, they take urine produced in the kidneys and bring it down into the bladder. Now, the bladder is the next step, and this is going to be a temporary reservoir for urine. So when we produce urine, we store it in the bladder, but we don't store it there for very long. We only keep it there until we get a sufficient amount of volume, and then we get rid of it, we expel it. There's multiple layers of tissue inside the bladder. Inside the very surface, we're going to have a mucous membrane. That's going to surround the lumen, the empty space. Now behind that we're going to have some transitional epithelium. Now we didn't talk about transitional epithelium, but it's another type of epithelial tissue. And this type of tissue is allowed, or it allows an organ or a structure to have some flexibility, some give. So our bladders can get quite full when the bladder's full of urine, and it can get a bit bigger. Then when we void that urine, the bladder will get smaller in size. Having that transitional epithelium there allows that organ, the bladder, to change shape, to get bigger and get smaller and not cause any damage. The bladder also has folds like we see in the stomach. So when the bladder is empty, it kind of folds up on itself to be a bit smaller, and then when it fills up, it can expand to hold a greater volume. There's going to be some connective tissue there to hold those layers together, and then we're going to have some muscles there as well. So there's actually a 3-layer coat of involuntary muscles, and we're going to use those muscles later in the process when we go to void the urine from the bladder. In the base of the bladder, we're going to see an area called the trigone. Let me just get rid of these. So the trigone area is going to be this triangle right here. And what that does is it's kind of an anchor for the bladder. Okay, that part, the trigone, kind of stays stationary, so it stays still. And what that's going to do is it prevents the opening of the ureters and the urethra from stretching. Keep in mind that all of this structure here that I'm highlighting in green, this is all muscle. When this contracts, the bladder gets smaller, and it pushes the urine from inside the bladder to the outside. By having this rigid structure here, it prevents the openings for the ureters that come into the back here, and then of course from the urethra at front, from moving and stretching, so it kind of stays still, and it gives some integrity to the bladder even though those muscles are going to contract and change its shape. And the last tube that we'll talk about in this section of the urinary system is going to be the urethra. Now this is a tube that'll extend from the bladder, and it'll move to the outside of the body. Okay, it's going to be different in males and females based on the anatomy of the male and female. So for the male, the urethra is going to be part of the urinary system, but it's also going to be part of the reproductive system. So a part of that tube is shared between where urine comes out, and the other part is where the semen and the urine comes out of the same tube, the urethra. Now in females, this isn't the case. The female reproductive system is separate from the urinary system, so there's a separate opening for the reproductive system and the urinary system. So for females, the urethra only carries urine from the bladder to the outside. Okay, so what we'll talk about for the rest of this video is the most important part of the urinary system, which of course is the kidneys. So what we'll talk about now is the anatomy and the structure of the kidneys, and this is crucial to know when we start talking about the physiology, production of urine, which we'll talk about in the next video. Okay, so our kidneys are the most vital organs, or amongst the most vital organs of the body. What they do is they excrete any unwanted substances, and that can be toxins, salts, metabolic waste, anything extra we have in our body fluids, in our blood that we don't need gets excreted at the kidneys. They have a major role to play in water balance, so they control that by having either really concentrated urine and a low volume, or really dilute urine and a higher volume. The kidneys also help maintain the acid-base balance in our body fluids by removing acids or adding buffers. They help regulate blood pressure by controlling the composition of the fluids in our bodies, also by enzymes and hormones. And they also play a role in regulating red blood cell production, because they produce a hormone called erythropoietin, which activates the red bone marrow to produce more blood cells when we need them and when we don't need them. So kidneys have a major role to play in our normal homeostasis in our body. Now, the structure of the kidney, the organization of the kidney, is super interesting and very important. Okay. The kidney is broken up into three general areas. The first area is going to be this light pink area we see on the outside. I'm going to try and highlight it for you by drawing a picture here. So this light pink area, that's going to be enclosed in that black line, and then I'll color it in orange, I guess. So this area here is going to be the cortex. Okay? And that cortex is going to be crucial when we talk about how these units here called nephrons, how these are organized. So keep that in mind. We've got the cortex on the outside. Directly inside the cortex we have the medulla, and that's going to be this area here. It has a bunch of triangles in here that we call the pyramids. So that area there is going to be the medulla. And then the third part of the kidney that we need to talk about is going to be the calyx. This is going to be the calyx right in here. So those are our three major structures of or locations of the kidney. Now, inside those structures we have a system of tubes that we call the functional unit of the kidney, and those are called nephrons. Okay, and each kidney will have millions of nephrons. They're a very intricate, complex system of capillaries and tubules that help filter the blood. And then, of course, we take things from the blood that we don't want, and then we take stuff from the body's fluids that we don't want, and we turn those unwanted substances into urine. So this structure, the way it's put together, is what allows us to produce urine. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the blood supply in the kidney is really, really important. Okay, since the kidney functions to filter out our blood, it has a major blood supply. So every minute your kidney receives between 1 liter and 1.5 liters of blood. So that's a huge amount of blood. It flows into the kidney from the renal. The renal artery branches directly off the aorta, so it has a blood supply 1 branch away from the heart. After the blood leaves the aorta, it empties into the renal artery. Then the blood branches off into countless smaller and smaller arterioles until we get to the capillaries. Eventually, those capillaries will end up, or they'll be into, each one of those capillaries will end up in a section that we call the Bowman's capsule, or we call the structure glomerulus. And I'll show you a picture of that in a couple of seconds. That's going to be the start of the nephron. And the nephron's goal is to filter the blood. And then, of course, once the blood is filtered, it goes from the arteriole into the vein. It empties back into the systemic circuit, the venous blood, and it drains back into the heart as deoxygenated blood. It gets from the kidneys to the heart via the inferior vena cava. Okay, now that we know about the kidneys and the nephron, what I want to talk about in the next video is going to be the structure of the nephron, how they're organized in the kidney, and how that helps the kidney produce urine.